The biggest surprises of the Bucs 53-man roster, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome into this WTSP Wednesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs. He is Evan Klosky at EKlosky_WTSP. We are your credentialed members of the media covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm the deputy editor over at SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Evan is, of course, on 10 Tampa Bay and at 10TampaBay.com. And you can catch the show Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game
time.
Plenty to discuss regarding the Buccaneers finalizing their initial 53-man roster, and we're going to talk defense as well as a player or two that didn't make the cut but is going to have an impact on the team this season. All that coming up in a little bit. Let's start things off, Evan, with the offensive side of the ball, and I'm going to run through this really quickly. But on offense, the Buccaneers have Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask, Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, Sean Tucker, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, Cameron Johnson, Trey Palmer, Cade Otton, Payne Durham, Keith, Devin Culp, Tristan Wirfs, Ben Bredesen, Graham Barton, Cody Mauch, Luke Gedeke, Robert Hainsey, Justin School, Brandon Walton, and Elijah Klein. That's 23 players on offense, only 3 running backs, only 5 wide receivers. Evan, what's kind of the biggest surprise to you looking at the offense and how things finished out on that side?
The biggest surprise has to be Cody Thompson not being wide receiver 6. Sterling Shepard that I mentioned last week right here on Locked On Bucs that I didn't think that Sterling Shepard was going to be an option solely because, well, 2 reasons actually. A, he's been injured most of camp. Injuries have been a long-standing issue with him, so obviously that doesn't help his case. But 2, you aren't going to carry a wide receiver 5 who's not going to play any special teams for you. He's very much, if he accepts a practice squad designation, he has to be convinced, which I think would be fairly easy to present the case. Now, look, David Moore is a guy that we had in town last year. I'm speaking as if I'm a coach. Is a guy we had in town last year. His first game with the team was, or his first elevation was November 28th, end of November, something along those lines. He made a huge play in the Green Bay Packers game to affect that contest, and he laid the dagger on the Philadelphia Eagles in the playoff game at home inside Raymond James Stadium. When it's mattered most, that's really when you dip into your depth, right? When you're about 9-10 games into the season and bodies are beaten and bruised and people have hit the IR, like you might be called upon. And Sterling is the guy who would replace a Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan. Any of those 3 go down, Sterling would come up. So that would be really my pitch to him. Is there are 3 guys on this team that have to stay healthy for us. We hope we don't dip to you, but if any of those 3 get hurt, or if it's a 1-week, 2-week, 3-week thing, you're the guy. Cody Thompson, while I think he's very good in his own right, he plays a little bit of a different role, not as much of a veteran type of guy. So I just thought he would be there for depth to kind of bring him along, and also he's a pretty decent special teams player. Has experience in this type of offense. Also, a veteran in his own right, just has done a little bit less than what Sterling Shepard has kind of done throughout his career. So, that would be number one for me easily is Cody Thompson, while also stating that I really hope that Sterling Shepard is still in town.
Yeah, Sterling Shepard not making the team was indeed stunning. As I said last week that you called me out on Monday via text message saying, roll the tape back. You were wrong. I was right. Nanny, boo-boo, stick your head in doo-doo. Those were his exact words. I'll post the screenshot of the text conversation.
Yeah, I'd like to see that screenshot.
But no, I 100% get it. At some point, you brainwashed me throughout your explanation, because by the end of the week, I was talking about Sterling probably not making the team. I was heaping praise on Cody Thompson, but yeah, a dumb comment from me, I suppose. But you would hope
there are no dumb comments, just dumb people. Just
uncalled for. You would think that Sterling Shepard knows the kind of his best chance to see an NFL field, if he wants to, is with the Buccaneers, join the practice squad, because it wouldn't even necessarily have to be Mike or Chris or Jalen that goes down. I mean, if you have an open roster spot and you think, you know what, Sterling's healthy, he's been doing well in practice, let's elevate him, we can get him in, 8-10 plays. We can utilize him in, against this particular defense. He'll have opportunities, I think, but it's totally his call. As far as the rest of the offense is concerned, there is no Chase Edmonds. He's on injured reserve. Greg Allman said that he's going to miss the season. He's done. So the Bucs are a little bit thin at running back, and gut feeling, and we're going to talk about practice squad, more a little bit later, but do the Bucs look around the league at some of the other cuts and find some depth at running back, or do you think they saw enough from a DJ Williams or Ramon Jefferson to think that they could elevate one of those guys if they need to down the line?
Personally, I would probably lean towards them searching around. I know Jefferson has a history with Liam Cohen, but I think between Jefferson and Williams, they kind of built a little bit differently. I don't know if they necessarily fit this offense. I think, to me, Jefferson would make the most sense because he probably knows Liam's offense the best, and those are kind of the best people to stick around who usually can help out. But I think that, to me, look, 99% of the time, you're going to bring back guys on your own practice squad and fill out the entire practice squad with your dudes. Because as Todd Bowles said early in the week, you don't want to really reteach everything to somebody new and have them kind of be behind everybody else. So, and most teams think that way. I would argue, though, running back is a position I'd like to see a little bit more depth at on the practice squad with one guy to search for. And I would maybe even consider, which I'm sure everybody else does as well, might want to look around and see one of these offensive linemen. Brandon Malton there is kind of clinging on to that final OL spot, and they probably, I know he's a local guy, and I love Brandon, but objectively speaking, they probably could improve there at the 9th and final offensive lineman position.
All right. Well, the Bucs certainly went hard on defense. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You all know how much I love going to live events, concerts, sporting events. I'm constantly talking on the show about a concert or a game I'm getting ready to go see. And the first place I'm checking out when I look for tickets is Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. In fact, if you're interested in seeing the Dodgers take on the Diamondbacks on Labor Day, you can get tickets for 50% off exclusively on Game Time while supplies last. I've used Game Time for everything from NBA to NHL to concert tickets, and with all-in pricing, I know exactly what I'm going to spend up front, so there's no surprises when I get to checkout. I also have the knowledge of using Game Time's lowest price guarantee so that if I find tickets in the same section or row for cheaper, Game Time is going to credit me 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Evan said it right here on this show that the Bucs, right here, just like he said that Sterling Shepard was not going to make the team. He also said the Bucs are probably going to go with 10 defensive backs. And Evan, you hit the under. Here's how the defense looks. You have Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey, Logan Hall, Greg Gaines, Will Golston, Ernest Brown. Then at the edge, you have Yaya Diaby, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Chris Braswell, Anthony Nelson, Marquise Watts, Jose Ramirez. Inside linebackers, Levante David, KJ Britt, JJ Russell, Servassier Dennis. Then defensive backs. Jamel Dean, Zion McCollum, Antoine Winfield Jr., Jordan Whitehead, Tyke Smith, Christian Izzian, Bryce Hall, Kayvon Merriweather, Josh Hayes, Tavier Thomas, Tyreek Funderburk. For those of you that would like me to do the counting for you, that's 11 defensive backs. And just for good measure, Jake Camarda, Chase McLaughlin, Evan Deckers, they are the specialists.
Shout out Evan.
Yeah. As I mentioned on Monday's episode, the Bucs moved on from longtime long snapper Zach Triner, but 11 defensive backs. And Todd Bowles talked about it on Tuesday, saying a lot of these guys contribute on special teams. He liked the versatility of a lot of them to be able to play safety and corner, as well as contributing on special teams. So where did the big surprise come for you on defense, and kind of where do you see the Bucs being the strongest in terms of position groups?
I mean, having 11 DBs is a lot.
Yes,
he did mention that, special teams plays a part in that. I think that they are big fans of Funderburk and what he could potentially be, even though he was kind of nursing an injury there at the end of camp. I was wondering if Josh Hayes was going to be on the outside looking in, but considering this is a man who also got a Pro Bowl vote last year as a special teamer, they obviously value him still kind of in that punt world. So I don't know if I necessarily had the biggest surprise, I guess, would be Ernest Brown IV over a guy like CJ Brewer, which I think was a 50-50 toss-up in my books. So I think people out there were leaning Brewer, and they went with Brown instead. So if I had to pick a surprise, that also, I think Keenan Isaac is very deserving of being on the 53-man roster, and you would expect that he's going to sneak on through, land on the practice squad, and first injury to any of those guys, right? He'll eventually find his way, on a game day roster and active. So, there are dudes here who land on the practice squad, and that, again, it's a pivotal role. We are looking at the 53-man roster. I'm looking at it on my screen. There are going to be a handful of guys here who are injured and don't play most of the season. We don't know who those guys are going to be. So it's football. You got to prepare for the worst, hope for the best.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of kind of preparing for the worst, Todd Bowles was talking about the difficulties of making some of these cuts and having to weigh a position group like outside linebacker against wide receiver. He mentioned it's hard to find pass rushers, but hopefully they can elevate a receiver from the practice squad if they have to. After the way things kind of went throughout training camp, throughout the preseason, I've actually started to like this edge rush rotation for the Bucs. You are the edge rush connoisseur for the Locked On Bucs podcast. Are you feeling more confident than you were throughout most of the offseason. I mean, all the way back to when we were talking about the NFL draft and you were really pounding the table for this is the position the Bucs really have to address.
Two things. One, I did find those comments rather surprising from Bowles, because to me, that's like Jose Ramirez or Marquise Watts were very close to being on the chopping block, right? I mean, who else is getting cut there? It's not Yaya, it's not Nelson, it's not Joe, and it's not Braswell. So when he says that, they were contemplating cutting one of those guys for a wide receiver. And considering Jose Ramirez had a 3-sack game and maybe some of the stuff that we saw Watts have last year, maybe they're like, maybe too much good tape out there. But
yeah,
I'm not overly confident still. As like Jose Ramirez, a 3-sack game, one fell in his lap. I certainly love the pressures and all that stuff, but typically in a Todd Bowles defense, you have to also know the run game, and you got to know coverage, and it's complicated. And that's what Marquise Watts, that's why he struggled to get on the field last year, even though we were begging for him to be out there, because, he flashes as a pass rusher. So I, again, believe this, it hinges on Yaya Diaby. The hype train has left the station a long time ago regarding him. He is set up on a pedestal to break through from any sort of major media outlet and national writer who's gotten the inside track there of Yaya, and we didn't really see him much in his training camp. We've heard a lot about him. We certainly know that he was in the gym all offseason. He's yoked. But I still am not 100% convinced that they have a dude who you can rely on, an outside linebacker, who's going to be able to win one-on-one battles. I don't know if it's doable, and it's going to have to be a quantity over quality approach. And that's where I continue to push with Yaya Diaby as my saving grace, as maybe he can be the guy. But I got to see it first. I got to see it. And we saw it towards the end of the year, but his pressures were not as sexy as his sack numbers. And that scares me a little bit. So, like the San Francisco game, he had 2 sacks, but one fell in his lap. Not all sacks are created equally here. So I believe that Yaya is actually a well-rounded player, but can he consistently get TFLs and sacks? I need to see it, and I will pom my way on that bandwagon when it starts happening, and I will shout from the rooftops about him. But yeah, at this point, still a little bit of a skeptic on Bowles being able to rely on one-on-one wins. He's going to blitz like normal, and he's going to bring a lot of pressure. He'll create a lot of sacks. The question always is, at what cost?
Well, and one other fun thing to note here, the Bucs, in just a few short years have gone from one of the oldest teams in the NFL to one of the youngest. They have 3 players on their roster over the age of 30. And right. I think that speaks, very highly of Jason Light and his staff and their ability to draft and keep these draft picks and find undrafted free agents and really have this huge influx of homegrown talent rather than, what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years from the Buccaneers organization, where it's been a lot of draft failure and free agents. So I thought that was a fun little tidbit there. Mike Evans, Levante David, Will Golston, they're all the old men in the building. There is a player or two that we did not talk about on here, but we will be talking about them come October or November. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here on the WTSP Wednesday episode of Locked On Bucs podcast. So there's no practice squad announcements as of right now during this recording, but we know that that's coming soon. We know that there are some guys you mentioned earlier, Sterling Shepard. There are guys that kind of have their spots reserved if they want them. But we see guys get called up from the practice squad every single year. And a lot of times they end up making an impact. You go back to last year, you mentioned it. David Moore came on strong late in the year and had some big moments for the Buccaneers. Who are one or two guys that did not make this initial roster that you have pegged as players that will have an impact on this team later this season, after they get elevated to the active roster? And please don't say John Wolford, because that's not good for anybody.
Let's, respect Wolford, but if he's in a game, we got some problems.
Right, exactly.
So I already mentioned, I don't know if he's going to accept the practice squad, but I think Sterling Shepard would be a very easy candidate to think about. I mentioned also Keenan Isaac. Big fan of Keenan Isaac. I think he could definitely hold his own to where, there's I would say after Bryce Hall, who I'm not 100% confident in, very kind of up and down camp, in my opinion. I think that if you had an injury to him, Keenan Isaac would be a guy who would fill in nicely in that spot as kind of that backup to Dean or Zion, or it just kind of got that makeup. Outside of that, like CJ Brewer is a dude that I really like, who can maybe find some snaps out there. I think that eventually Luke Haggard could win that 9th OL spot. I think he might get an elevation. I liked what he did throughout portions of camp. And, Cody Thompson is another dude who I think will be able to wiggle his way onto an active roster spot at some time there. So, I will say for the most part, it's good. There are about like 5 guys, I think, that were cut who I think were worthy of the 53. That's a good spot to be in. And then, after that, you just kind of like sink or swim. I do really like what they're doing with the DBs. Not a lot of kind of versatile options. Again, we've talked about this. I need to know if they're cooking up something with, like, they could be throwing like dime out there. Like, are we just going to be seeing some like DBs all over the field, and they're going to concoct some sort of defense that, we don't really see that often? I expect Marcus Banks, who we saw flashes of, I think that he'll kind of be moved over to a more cornerback role. And a guy like Rashad Wisdom, shout out UTSA, I think he will kind of be that safety ilk, built in a very similar fashion to Antoine and Tyke. He comes along that same mold of how Todd Bowles likes his safeties. So a lot of pieces I like on the practice squad, but and Rakim Jarrett, by the way, who will be eligible to return, will have his presence felt at some point, and that will, the roster will probably, if you ask me today who's going to go off the roster for Rakim Jarrett, we can have that discussion. But for the most part, with injuries, I'm sure it's going to work itself out. So that's kind of where we're at. Ultimately, a pretty strong, deep group, and still probably need to see what Servassier Dennis can do, because Todd Bowles has mentioned, hey, like, he's going to have his own packages out there, and KJ's, not going. It's going to be opponent to opponent basis, and we just really haven't seen much of Servassier. He's injured a lot, and you don't want to have that label too early in your career. There are certain guys where, Carlton Davis, injured a lot, great player, but the Bucs said, forget it. Like, we can't keep going down this road. So, your best ability sometimes is your availability. And there are spots where I think they have room to grow, or people, players on his team need to answer certain questions, but that ultimately why in the long term, why I think this team is building towards a crescendo in 2025. As good as I think they can be this year, I do believe it. I see that picture with another draft class and maybe some more money in their pocket. I think they're strongly positioned for 2025 to really become a team that people talk about. If not, making a decent run in 2024.
You brought up Jarrett, and it's not something we really talked about when we focused on the offense, but I think it's a question worth asking. When the Bucs only carry 5 wide receivers, you had Cody Thompson out there, who we all thought really had a shot at making the roster. But do you feel that Jarrett being designated to return played into their decision to just roll with 5 for right now, knowing that, if they need to, they can call up Thompson or Shepard if he accepts the spot. But at some point they were going to get Jarrett back, who is one of those guys that not only can play on offense, but is a contributor on special teams.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that is that's the song and dance of a numbers game. That's really the tough position that Todd Bowles and company are put in. Sometimes the player did everything that they were supposed to do, and they're deserving of that spot. But in a numbers game, hey, we're going to go this route and play it out. And look, it might not work for the first couple of weeks. Things might change. You might send someone, wave a guy to bring him back and bring someone up and, do a little teeter, seesaw battle here of those last kind of spots. But ultimately, when you get down to the end of it, you gotta be versatile. And that's why if you're going to be number 48, 49, 50, you can't, going back to Sterling, you just can't be a one-job guy. And at this point in his career, Shepard ain't giving you much beyond playing wide receiver, and there's nothing wrong with it, but he's not a top 3 wide receiver really anymore. So, I would hope that he's not too shocked about what happened, and hopefully he understands he's still pretty valuable in the big picture.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Please check out everything that Evan has going on over on 10 Tampa Bay and 10tampabay.com. Evan, what's on the docket? We're a week and a half away from actual real Buccaneers football now.
That's right. We're going to have our preseason primer episode of the Blitz. I would say it's going to be our Blitz season 4 debut, but it's kind of the preseason for us. We're going to break through all the angles you need to know about this team entering the year. We know who the 53 men are. Let's get all the storylines from last year out of the way and who's coming back and what happened. Catch everybody up so that when week 1 comes with the Commanders, that September 8th episode, which, by the way, you can also watch it on the 10 Tampa Bay Plus streaming device app, wherever Roku, Fire Stick, wherever you go, watch your apps. You can see it on 10 Tampa Bay Plus, 10tampabay.com. 10 Tampa Bay. We will be covered on all our bases to make sure that you have your Buccaneers coverage throughout the year, supplementing what you already get here on Locked On Bucs. I come crossover with James. James comes over to me, and we have a grand old time.
Absolutely. So, yeah, make sure you're checking out everything going on over there. Can't wait for the Blitz to get started. Make sure you are following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs, at eCloskey WTSP. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on or wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining us right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.